Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us during the Lytham Partners Fall 2022 Investor Conference. My name is Roger Weiss. I'm a Vice President of Lytham Partners. In this presentation, we welcome Aytu BioPharma, NASDAQ ticker symbol of AYTU. And with us today is their Chief Executive Officer, Josh Disbrow. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that management is available for one-on-one meetings later this week. If you've not already signed up, please send me an email at weiss@lythampartners.com or visit www.lythampartners.com/virtual and click the one-on-one meeting request button. All right, Josh, let's begin. Josh, why don't you start? Could you please introduce yourself and give us a brief overview of Aytu?
Sure, happy to, Roger. Great to be with you here today, and thanks for having us at the conference. As you mentioned, I'm Josh Disbrow. I'm one of the co-founders and Chief Executive Officer of Aytu BioPharma. My background is 25 plus years in pharmaceuticals, having grown up in the industry and started off as a sales representative at a large multinational pharmaceutical company, then transitioned into smaller startup type environments, venture-backed biotechnology companies. And my brother, who's my identical twin and the co-founder of Aytu with me, started a company called Arbor Pharmaceuticals at the age of 31. I joined him about 9 months in, and we scaled that operation from 0 products, no revenue, developed some assets focused on pediatrics, and ultimately scaled the organization to about $250 million in annual revenue when we exited, having sold our family stake to KKR, the large private equity firm. Having built that to a substantial exit, we transitioned on, and I moved out to beautiful Colorado, where I was Chief Operating Officer of a biotechnology company from which we spun Aytu BioPharma about 7 years ago. And we spun the company out really as a follow-on to the success that we had at Arbor Pharmaceuticals, a similar type of model whereby we would bring in various assets, scale the company from a revenue perspective, diversify the base of assets, and ultimately continue growing. And that's really where Aytu is today. So Aytu is focused on pediatrics and ADHD, and we'll get to sort of how we put the company together over the last few years to that end. We also actually have a consumer division. And then we have a rare disease pediatric onset pipeline that we'll talk about as well that we're very excited about. So the company's fully integrated with the commercial infrastructure. We are focused on pediatrics and ADHD, as I mentioned, and we do have a very exciting pipeline opportunity. So the company's really well positioned and has grown largely through acquisition over the last few years, and we'll get to some of that. But with just over 100 million in revenue, we're excited about the trajectory and the momentum we've captured here recently.
That's great. And you've already referred to it a little bit. So I guess specifically, could you talk a little bit about Aytu's evolution over, say, the last 2+ years and how the company is currently positioned?
Sure. Yeah. So we really began a relatively assertive transition plan really about a year before the pandemic hit. So call it mid 2019, we began looking beyond what was then our sort of current product portfolio, which was really sort of a couple of small products, but really a single product focus. And we had the opportunity through some strategic investment and just relationships we have to begin to really spread out and diversify our portfolio and come back home, so to speak, coming back home being pediatrics, having started Arbor while it was a private company, it was a significant success. And we started in pediatrics where that company actually remains today with a portfolio of products there. So we had an opportunity to bring in a suite of pediatric assets from a public company called Cerecor. And that really put us back into pediatrics, with a line of specialty items, and those are products that we sell today and have really grown very nicely. We parlayed that transaction into the acquisition of a company called Innovus Pharmaceuticals, which was also a publicly traded company. And they were a consumer company. And we thought, well, in this day and age, if you're going to be in pharmaceuticals, you need to get close to the consumer. Patients and healthcare consumers are taking such control of their health with the advent of things like telehealth and all the online access that patients and consumers have. And so we acquired Innovus in an all-stock transaction. And those two transactions, the pediatric prescription portfolio and the consumer portfolio acquisition, put us on about a $47 million revenue run rate. And then the pandemic hit, and we did the opposite of what some companies did, which was we went into hyperdrive. We actually acquired a test kit, and that enabled us to help in the pandemic fight, sold a significant number of COVID antibody test kits, but it also enabled us to recapitalize the company such that we had a healthy balance sheet. And as the pandemic wore on, we began to further explore opportunities to scale the organization and identified Neos Therapeutics as a great target to acquire, to really build out and further bolster the pediatric orientation, given that Neos was focused in ADHD, which is a pediatric onset disorder. It's largely diagnosed and treated through childhood, but it also lingers into adulthood. And so with that, we closed on an acquisition of Neos Therapeutics back in March of 2021, having announced that deal in late calendar 2020, and having filed the requisite paperwork and so forth, we were able to get that deal done in the spring of 2021, and followed that almost immediately with the acquisition of a private company called Rumpus Therapeutics, which was a single asset development stage company focused on pediatric onset rare diseases. And their first asset was a molecule that we'll talk about here in a little while called enzastaurin, which, if approved, would be the first and only treatment for a deadly, devastating disease called VEDS, or vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So that's all a very long way of saying over that 2+ year period of time, we transitioned the company to about $7.5 million in revenue to now having just posted our highest quarter in revenue in company history. From a revenue perspective, almost $100 million in revenue, diversified across ADHD and pediatrics and consumer, with this very exciting pipeline opportunity in AR101. So that's a little bit about how we transitioned from there to here.
Got it. And you're now have a run rate of approximately, we'll call it $100 million a year. Could you talk about the specific operating segments, where the revenues are being generated, and also how you think about marketing those individual segments and continuing the growth that you've demonstrated?
Yeah, so we've got two operating segments within the commercial business: prescription and consumer health. Consumer health is what we call Innovus, the company that we acquired back just prior to the pandemic. So I'll talk through the prescription business first. Prescription business generated in excess of $60 million for the year ending June 30th, and we just posted those numbers here this week via a filing of our 10K, and we announced our earnings on Tuesday. And that is, as I mentioned, about a $60 million revenue business. 50 of that roughly is the ADHD franchise. And that franchise is comprised of Adzenys XR ODT, which is the world's only orally disintegrating tablet formulation of amphetamine, and Cotempla XR ODT, which is also the world's only orally disintegrating tablet formulation, but in this case of methylphenidate. And that's a large category. ADHD is a significant prescription category, excess of 80 million prescriptions annually in the US alone. And these two products really operate within the largest segment of the ADHD prescription category, which is the stimulant segment. If you're going to be in that category, you need to have a stimulant, and we have both. We have methylphenidate, which tends to skew younger and be more the starter stimulant, and then we have amphetamine, which tends to skew older and tends to be a little bit of a higher caliber stimulant for better symptom control for patients that maybe are more moderate or severe ADHD patients. And those products have been growing very nicely. Neos developed those products, brought those through the FDA approval process, got them launched, ultimately got them growing, and then the pandemic hit, and they ran into some challenges, so we were able to pick up Neos and obviously bring the products on board, brought their entire commercial infrastructure on board, such that the former Neos commercial infrastructure is really what is now the new Aytu BioPharma. And then we augment those products with a very nice suite of specialty pediatric brands, one of which is our multivitamin line. It's two brands. One is Poly-Vi-Flor, one is Tri-Vi-Flor, and they're a multivitamin containing sodium fluoride for dental health. They also contain another ingredient, which is a folic acid, which is a body-ready folic acid called L-methylfolate. And those products are growing nicely, are uniquely positioned within the fluoride and multivitamin market, and have really nice intellectual property by virtue of this L-methylfolate light product that has significant and unique properties. And then we have a final product called Carbinol ER, which is a first generation antihistamine. So all of those products together generate in excess of $60 million annually. And we drive sales through our sales force. And we have an outstanding pharmacy program called RX Connect, which we can discuss here shortly. And then on the other side of the commercial business is the consumer business. And it just posted its highest revenue 12-month period in history at $35.5 million, which was growth up over the last year of about 8%. And that's a business that is largely driven through online channels, Amazon, e-commerce, and then there's another side of the business where we do direct mail to sell our dietary supplements. And that business, it consists of about 20 products, and most of the business is being driven through the Amazon channel, and those are primarily over-the-counter medicines that compete with the large national brands like Flonase, for example. We have a lower-cost alternative called Flutacare, and Rogaine or Minoxidil, we have our own brand of that called Regoxidine, which also is lower cost. And so for patients that are healthcare consumers that are going online, particularly going through Amazon to purchase perhaps a national brand, these may catch their eye. And these products have grown tremendously by virtue of the efficiency through which we're able to sell through Amazon and the fact that we were able to sell these at a lower price point. And then there's a small number of specialty items, personal care products, as well as dietary supplements. And again, we largely sell those through direct-to-consumer channels, most notably through direct mailings, and have direct response and are able to get patients on subscriptions. And these are for healthy aging, longevity, and sort of associated conditions for patients as they're getting a bit older. And that business has grown significantly, and we think there's significant prospects for continuing to drive sales growth both through the online channel as well as selectively through direct-to-consumer avenues. And again, that's a business that just generated north of 35 million in annual revenue. It's close to breaking even, burns very little cash, and we think we can cross over the profitability chasm here in the relative near term. So all in, call it a $96+ million business, split almost 2/3, 1/3 in favor of RX. And the RX business just posted its first EBITDA positive quarter. And so we're excited about that and think we can continue to grow, drive profitability such that we can begin self-funding and ultimately funding the pipeline.
That's super. And you mentioned it too, and I just want to circle back on this. How does the RX Connect fit into the prescription program, and how does it not only fit in, but how does it differentiate your business versus other pharmaceutical companies? And kind of gives a little more, I guess, both explanation and understanding of what this does for you guys.
RX Connect is a great program, and it really enables a great deal of leverage. And what I mean by that is the ability to put additional products onto this platform to enable further growth for the company, while also accelerating the growth of our current products. So quite simply, what RX Connect is, it's a program that Neos Therapeutics developed, and we have, I would say, blown out and really optimized even further. First of all, we put all of the products on the platform, and so now the Heritage Aytu products join the Neos Heritage products to give us a full suite of our 5 prescription products. And RX Connect fits hand in glove with our sales force's efforts. The sales force is out there primarily calling on physicians to generate demand for the prescription products. They're giving the features and benefits and reasons to believe, but along with the clinical messaging and the messaging around just what the benefits of our products, they're giving physicians and their staff really what they want, which is a solution for the everyday hassle that is prescribing products in the United States today. It is a hassle. It is a tremendous burden on offices between prior authorizations and having to step through preferred brands and having massive unpredictability around what a patient's copay is going to be month to month, and are they actually going to get the product that was prescribed, or are they going to get a generic, and if they get a generic, are they going to get the right one? And so there is just a massive layer of issue after issue that comes back to haunt these physicians in their offices. And so we go and say, if you will send one of our prescription products to a partner pharmacy with whom we've partnered, and we're not contracted with any of these pharmacies, we just have informal relationships with these pharmacies that want to do all they can to, first of all, capture this business from some of the larger chains, but more importantly, take care of these patients in the best way possible and give them predictable experiences with predictable products at predictable prices. And so we say, if you will send it to one of these partner pharmacies, they will get exactly that: predictable experience at a predictable price, in a predictable product. They'll get Adzenys XR ODT, Cotempla XR ODT, or one of our multivitamins or Carbinol, and they'll get it without a hassle. And that is a huge benefit to the patients because they're not having to worry about, well, my copay was $35 in November. Why is it now $680 in January? Well, it's because that may be the full price for that brand. And if you're in the high deductible period, given how your insurance plan may work, you may be in for that sticker shock. And until you've worked through your copay, through that period of time where you've paid that down and gotten and satisfied your deductible, you could be paying full cash. And the bottom line is we take care of all that through Rx Connect. We essentially served as an underwriter for these prescriptions such that any time of the year, any given month, they will, first of all, they will get Adzenys XR or any of our products, and they will get it at a predictable copay such that patients will never pay any more than $35. And here's what that does for the physician. It's really not surprising that this would be the benefit, but the bottom line is they don't get that dreaded callback. They don't get that negative feedback loop where the patient is calling and complaining or just frankly saying, I can't get this prescription. And we all experience these hassles. You know, many of us experience them on a monthly or semi-monthly basis, depending on how frequently you get your prescriptions. And so we can cut all that out. So that's what Rx Connect does. Now, how it does what it does is a bit proprietary. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of back-end analytics. There's a lot of specific things that we do to enable this white glove service, but it ultimately has driven sales growth tremendously because when physicians see how little hassle they experience when prescribing our medications, they prescribe more. And every time we put a product on this platform, it grows and we're able to benefit the patient and, as importantly, benefit the physician and his or her staff such that they continue to be inclined to send prescriptions through these pharmacies. And of course, they favor our prescriptions because of the benefits that delivers to their patients, both from a clinical perspective, as well as from a convenience and a cost perspective. So it's been a really great program for us.
No, it sounds phenomenal. One of the things that you've talked about in the past a little bit is your expense reduction program. If you could talk a little bit about, what it is currently, how it's doing, and where do you expect to be in the not too distant future, and ultimately kind of the totals, scale and scope of the project.
To step back in time a little bit, so remind you that we closed on the Neos transaction back in March of last year, and so call it just about 18 months ago. We announced a sales force consolidation and an overall expense reduction plan that would yield savings in the neighborhood of $15 million and more. And let me just say that we're well on track to achieve that. Through consolidation of the sales force, as I mentioned, alone, we've massively cut into that number. That was easily in excess of a third of that overall expense reduction plan when you think about the redundant territories that we had. And so while those are hard decisions to make, it was the right thing to do for the business, which was to collapse many of our territories into one. For example, we'd have two territories in a large geographic area like Atlanta or Charlotte, and those are now populated by a single or maybe just two sales representatives as opposed to 2, 4, or even 5 if you had both companies' reps continuing to operate. And by the way, what that has done is significantly improve the efficiency in any of these markets where we have reps to, in some cases, carry the full bag, but really enable significant synergies there as we cut out those headcount. We obviously have two public companies. Neos was a NASDAQ listed company, so they had all the requisite processes and procedures in place. They had their own board of directors, their own C-suite, their own team of executives. And obviously we've done a lot to consolidate that such that there's single officers and obviously single board of directors, and you cut out things like D&O policies and all the things like that. So that went a long way to get these expenses sort of squeezed out. And then really the last big piece that we're pursuing now is the shutdown of the Neos manufacturing facility in Grand Prairie, Texas, which is as much about margin improvement as it is about expense reduction. When I say margin improvement, I'm talking gross margin. They have a large manufacturing facility that manufactures Adzenys and Cotempla. It does a very good job, but it's a fairly inefficient setup just given the utilization percentage of that building. It's a large square footage facility. We don't occupy it all, and we don't run 3 shifts a day over 24 hours. So it is just a burden from an accounting perspective to yield a strong gross profit margin. And so the next big piece that will drive expense further down and improve the profitability profile is the transferring out of that manufacturing into a contract manufacturer. And that process is well underway. We've said we're targeting 2023 to have that process underway and be manufacturing at our new facility. And I'm pleased with the progress of the tech transfer that's underway with both Adzenys and Cotempla. A little more still to do. We've got to do bioequivalence and complete that. We've then got to submit PAS to the which is an approval supplement that has to go to the FDA, to the agency. They have to come in and approve it, likely inspect the new facility, and then they'll, we hope, clear it. If all those things happen, we can be in a position to reduce our gross profit, or excuse me, the expenses that really feed into gross profit margin and directly improve gross profit margin on the ADHD meds by upwards of 15% or more. And that has a dramatic, almost immediate effect once we are manufacturing in the new facility. So more to follow there, but that's all a long way to say across Salesforce consolidation of overlapping corporate expenses to get down G&A, and then to really drive up the gross profit margin. We're well on our way to realize that cost savings and improve the gross profit margin, but still more to do.
Got it. And I guess if we could just take that one step further, once you achieve all these cost savings, because obviously a number have already been accomplished, what kind of impact will that have on your EBITDA?
We definitely expect clearly a positive impact on EBITDA. Having just posted the RX division's first EBITDA positive quarter, we're pointing people to the fact that look, we're getting close. We're getting to the point that we think we can consistently report positive EBITDA on not just the RX side of the business, but on the entire commercial business. And so when we get to the other side of the Grand Prairie shutdown, continue our growth trajectory on both sides of the business, and continue to condense some of these operational roles and to further reduce G&A, we're going to be right there. And so while we're not guiding to a specific breakpoint at which we do cross over, again, I think the evidence is strong. And when you look at really our adjusted EBITDA as a company for this last quarter of fiscal 22, which we just reported out, we demonstrated less than $1 million of burn when you measure that by EBITDA, when you take out our R&D. And so really the only source of the significant burn for the company this last quarter was the R&D piece, of which, by the way, most of that was one-time milestone payments. And so ultimately, the commercial side of the business, we believe, can stand alone and be profitable, and are very, very close here. And we think can be there consistently in short order.
That's great. Well, I think we've talked a lot about the commercial side of the business. Maybe now's a good time to switch over to the other side, the development side and the pipeline side. I think you mentioned it at the beginning. Could you talk about AR101 and beds, and kind of what the challenge there is, both from a medical and from a development side, and where we're going?
Yeah, happy to. So first of all, I'll tell you a little bit about the disease that we're targeting with this asset that we call AR101, and that disease is VEDS, or vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And this is an absolutely catastrophic condition whereby patients, through a mutation, develop a syndrome whereby they die of spontaneous arterial ruptures and tears and dissections, and they bleed out and die. VEDS is a subset and the most deadly and vascular subtype of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a group of syndromes of connective tissue disorders that largely affect connective tissue disorders in the area of the joints and sometimes the skin, but in the case of VEDS, it's the vasculature that is affected. These patients are born with a mutation that disables the sort of the normal proliferation of type 3 collagen, which serves as the building blocks for our vasculature. But what has been recently discovered about VEDS is that there's actually a dysregulation of a cell signal caused by upregulation of a particular kinase called protein kinase C, and it's impacted by a host of biochemical reactions, but everything centers really on the dysregulation of this particular kinase. And a very well-esteemed researcher and clinician at Johns Hopkins by the name of Dr. Hal Dietz, through the work that he's conducted over many years in his laboratory there at Hopkins, he has discovered this dysregulation, that it's not the fragility of the vasculature alone, and it's not the sole genetic mutation. It's not that in and of itself causes these ruptures and these catastrophic arterial events. It's this dysregulation. And if you could somehow squelch or turn off that dysregulation and turn down that kinase, you could, in theory, solve for this disease. And in animal models, that's exactly what has been observed. When you can turn off this dysregulation and this overproduction of PKC through PKC inhibition, you can dramatically improve outcomes in the animals with this condition. Taking a little bit of a sidestep just to describe the work that's been done. So Dr. Dietz has created the first animal model with a mutation and physical manifestations of VEDS, and it perfectly recapitulates the human condition such that these animals die very violently of these catastrophic arterial events. They have these pseudoaneurysms, these aneurysms, and these ruptures, bleed out and die, and as a consequence of not just the mutation that has been knocked in, but of the dysregulation and the upregulation of PKC. And when he treats these animals in equimolar doses of a PKC inhibitor, and specifically with enzastaurin, these animals have dramatic improvements in outcomes such that the number of events they're experiencing reduced by 60+%. So it's really a dramatic improvement in the outcomes of these animals. And again, this model really perfectly recapitulates, both the type of aneurysms and ruptures and dissections that they're having. In terms of it really resembles the human condition, as well as the location that those events happen. And whether it's the descending aorta, whether it's anywhere throughout the arterial tree, it's very similarly placed. And so, long story short, Johns Hopkins put a lot of intellectual property around this whole notion. There's the methods of use around using PKC inhibition. We've covered, by the way, the entire swath of any method of basically down-regulating PKC, whether that's through a MEK inhibitor, through the PKC-MEK-ERK pathway. All of that is essentially implicated in the intellectual property. And we license all that globally from Hopkins. And so what we have is the ability to now go out and ask the big question of, does this translate into the clinic? Does this translate into efficacy from a patient perspective? And so we have licensed that intellectual property. We have also licensed rights to enzastaurin from a company called Aytu BioPharma. Now, what I'll say as sort of a backdrop is enzastaurin, the molecule that we have licensed and that we're now putting into clinic, was developed by Eli Lilly, and it was developed and it is a protein kinase C beta isoform inhibitor, and so it's a perfectly situated and well-suited molecule to turn off this aberrant PKC signal. So Lilly developed it for a couple of different cancers, DLBCL, lymphoma, glioblastoma, and unfortunately, we're not able to demonstrate durability of remission in those clinical studies, so they shelved the asset. And a company called Aytu BioPharma went and approached Lilly and acquired the asset, and they are planning now to rerun clinical trials using a biomarker enrichment strategy. From de novo, we license all of the non-oncology indications, inclusive of these connective tissue disorders. And of course, VEDS is the first place we're targeting. And so we've got the benefit of having enzastaurin is multifold. It's been studied preclinically, it's been studied clinically, it's been dose optimized, it's been poked and prodded many, many ways. Thousands of patients studied over long periods of time, in some cases up to 3 years. So we have a safety database, we have dose ranging studies, we have PK data that demonstrates the PKC signal gets fully squelched, the target gets fully selected for and turned off. And we have a CMC database, as we've got all the chemistry, all the manufacturing quality control pieces, and we have product actually made. And so we have the ability, in this case, to go straight into a clinical study utilizing the preclinical data on the VED side from Dr. Dietz's lab. And you couple that with all of the preclinical and clinical data, safety data, CMC work that's been done through the Lilly work. We pair those two together, those packages together, and we're able to basically go straight into a single registrational study for VEDS using the same molecule at the same dose and same strength that Lilly studied it for. And so that's what the FDA has enabled. They essentially said, now you just need to go demonstrate efficacy in this VEDS patient population. You can use the same product, the same dose, and the same setup that Lilly did, understanding that it turns off the PKC signal, and ultimately see if we can observe a reduction in events in humans, which is really what matters. You need to be able to demonstrate that you can reduce events at a higher rate than standard of care, which really is watchful waiting. And so that's what we're set to do. We're set to pursue this forward. We're set to initiate what we call the PREVENT trial here in early 2023, so not too far from now. And if we can demonstrate that patients treated with enzastaurin have a a significantly reduced rate of events that require medical intervention, so an event that actually manifests clinically. If we can demonstrate that, we would be in a position to gain approval, and that would make it the first and only treatment for this deadly catastrophic disease. So we're very excited about where we are with this program and ultimately what it could mean for these patients. So it's a significant opportunity for them and obviously for the company as well.
That's phenomenal. As you think about the current state of the company and the future, what do you think are Aytu's biggest value drivers right now?
That's certainly one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Roger, the AR101 program and the prospects that that has for these patients. And it goes without saying that if we can get this product approved and brought forward to these patients around the world, and this is obviously a condition that affects patients all over the world, 1 in 50,000, it's a huge opportunity. I left out the fact that we already have orphan drug designation in the U.S. as designated by the FDA. We also have orphan drug designation granted by the European Commission, so have all of Europe covered, and would expect to get orphan designations in the other markets like Japan and South Korea that have those designations statutorily. And that obviously affords us a great deal. It affords us exclusivity, 7 years in the US, 10 years in Europe, 10 years plus potentially in Japan. And so that's a huge advantage. On top of the intellectual property that we already have licensed from Johns Hopkins, we've got a great position from a market exclusivity perspective. And you get pricing, of course, with orphan drugs. Orphan drug prices are many multiples in some cases of sort of regular conditions, if you will, more broadly treated conditions. And so you get the benefit of that. And if you add up the numbers just around the world, just using a simple calculation of 1 in 50,000 and really just target the key markets, the top markets in Europe and Asia and the United States, you get to a potential revenue number of in excess of $1 billion before you're even pursuing some of the secondary markets. And so it's exciting from an economic perspective, not nearly as exciting as the opportunity to treat these patients for whom there are no treatments anywhere on the planet. They really just, their physicians unfortunately have to employ watchful waiting because there are no treatments. And sometimes they'll put them on background medications like beta blockers and so forth, but there's no evidence to suggest that those actually improve the rate of events that these patients have. So what we're doing with enzastaurin for the first time is taking a true disease modification approach of actually turning off the aberrant cell signal that is causing the spark that causes ultimately this fire within the vessels that does cause these catastrophic ruptures and other events. And so that's very exciting. But I couple the excitement for the pipeline with the excitement of all the things that we're doing on the commercial side to drive real value. RX Connect has been a huge value driver for the company. And when we look at the revenue trajectory and the fact that we just posted our all-time high revenue quarter here at almost 27.5 million, I think that just shows that we're executing, that we have the right team in place. We've got a great mechanism in RX Connect to really drive further growth to enable a much better experience for these patients and physicians. And we've got leverage now with this infrastructure. RX Connect enables us to not just drive our own products, but potentially bring other products into the fold to offer a broader portfolio to physicians. And so whether those are other products within ADHD or pediatrics, more to follow there, but ultimately we have the ability to bring in additional assets and grow and further catalyze the prescription segment's growth. And of course, the consumer group, knocking on the door, break even, not quite as close as the RX group, which, as I mentioned, is actually EBITDA positive for the last quarter of fiscal 22, but still very close. And I think that can be a unique value driver for the company as well to continue to drive beyond 100 million in revenue, cross the profitability line, and ultimately start funding the company's core operations along with the R&D operations. So a lot that I'm excited about.
Oh, that's phenomenal. As we get toward the end of the conversation here, is there anything else that would be helpful for investors to understand the business and where you guys are going?
There's a couple of things I think about, Roger. First of all, is just, again, the fundamentals of the business that are healthy and they're strong and really moving in the right direction. Again, we've got an RX division that just crossed the chasm for its first time on the RX side. And while that may not, I'm not suggesting that we are going to be profitable every single quarter going forward, but that is certainly to say clearly there's a hint that we are getting there. And I think it's likely that people will see us going forward, approaching profitability and getting to that. So I think it's important for people to recognize that. I think it's important also to think about just in a sort of a normally valued market, which this is not, how a pharmaceutical company generating nearly 100 million in revenue might be rationally valued. And historically you would say 2 to 3 times revenue might be something that resembles a sort of a normal valuation. We obviously are substantially under that, and so there's potentially some more work we need to do, not potentially, certainly more work we need to do to inform investors of the fact that, look, this is a real company with significant revenues, gaining real scale, and a huge opportunity with this AR101 project. This is a big shot on goal that if it turns positive, as we're optimistic it will, it's science. We have to let the science bear out, and we obviously have to let the clinical study work through. But if we do get a positive readout such that we statistically significantly improve outcomes, it's a huge inflection point for the company beyond the 100 million in revenue we're already generating. And so I'd like to point out that this is not a binary event. This is not a company that has sort of a 0 to 100. This is really we have that binary opportunity, but we have a base business that's generating almost 100 million in revenue, that's near profitability and has the ability to continue to scale. And so I think that's what I would leave prospective and current investors with, that it's a real business with real revenues and an opportunity to grow further, and a pipeline opportunity that really is second to none.
That's great. Josh, thank you very much for your time today. We greatly appreciate it. To anyone out there who's not already signed up for a one-on-one, again, please send me an email at weiss@lythampartners.com, or again, visit www.lythampartners.com/virtual and click the one-on-one meeting request button. We hope you all enjoy the conference. Thank you again.